can these be changed? Can these imprints be changed later in life?
Think you can change anything. I think that you've got to be willing to do the work. And I think that's why I went into pediatrics. It's still tough because you got to get mom and dad on board. And one of the things that I think is really impacting when you bring that concept to the person, are you willing to do the work? It takes a lot of work, especially as you get older. And I know you can because we all talk about neuroplasticity, and we can put in a great effort and a great threshold of input, and you can start to move the needle.
Welcome to the Two Curious MD podcast. I'm Dr. Ali Ahmed.
And I'm Dr. Soraya Rahman.
With the wisdom from holistic, alternative, and these conventional medicine, we are here to challenge the status quo.
We're curious about the connectivity and complexity between diverse fields of knowledge as they relate to consciousness, chronic illness, mental health, resilience, and beyond.
Learning more about the art and science of healing, or listening to stories of extraordinary healing. You're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Two Curious MDs, where medicine is more than just science. It's story, art, connection, and integration. Hosted by myself, Soraya Rahman, and my co-host, Dr. Alia Ahmed. This is a space where we challenge the boundaries of traditional healthcare and uncover the untold stories shaping the future of medicine. Today, we are joined here by our guest, Laura Hanson, Dr. Laura Hanson, and we're going to be talking about unlocking the subconscious. And so with that, I'll pass that back to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Laura, for being here. I'm excited to talk about the subconscious mind because we deal with the subconscious mind with ketamine-assisted therapy all the time. I tell patients it's your access. You get ketamine is a medicine that kind of gets patients into a meditative state, a psychedelic state. It's a dream state. And often when you kind of let go of that conscious brain, the awake brain, and you are just in this more relaxed kind of deep state of consciousness, you can learn a lot. And whether you call it the access to the inner child or to the access to the subconscious mind or to, memories or just that meditative state, there's so much that can happen in that state. So tell us a little bit about your work and how does the subconscious mind, say, formed in early childhood? And what are those those windows of developmental states like in that development of that subconscious mind? So I'm asking a couple of questions, but tell us from the beginning, like, what is a subconscious mind? How would you define it? And when does it really start? Where does that really come from?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. This is going to be a fun conversation. So the subconscious mind starts actually the last trimester of pregnancy and is developing until about 8.5 years of age. And so I love too how you frame it, the developmental windows, because that is all of us. We've all experienced that timeline. Now, I primarily work with children, but I also have a lot of adults that come in because I offer neuro and biofeedback. And when you're talking about the child, this part of their development is really their foundation. And there's so many things that are going on during all of those developmental windows that are being highly influenced by that subconscious mind. And that subconscious mind, we want to think about it as the acorn didn't fall too far from the tree. So mom and dad or the home life is what is truly influencing how that subconscious mind is actually going to shape. The big deal about this is that it's 95 of your function, even today as adults, where the conscious mind is only 5. And so how you get wired up is going to influence the rest of your life. So one of the things that we do here at Connect My Brain, we're also called Connect My Child's Brain. I also go, well, let's just go for a third, Connect Your Brain. Let's just put them all in there. So my pathway is utilizing neuro and biofeedback. That's one of the main therapies that I offer here at the practice. And so we'll put a cap on somebody's head. There'll be 19 channels. That's considered the gold standard, and we're going to collect data. Now, we're not reading their mind, but we're looking at brain waves. We're looking at how those brain waves are being organized in that brain. And so while your brain waves are everywhere, they do dominate certain places. And so we look at the organization of those brain waves. We look at the powers. Is there too much? Is there too little? We look at how many standard deviations away are you from typical. Okay, so let's at least break down that piece. So a standard deviation, if I had a bell curve and I had a mean average, what a normative data bank will do based on gender, age, and handedness, where do you fit in to that data? So it's not normal, it's typical, okay? So we can't judge normal, we can judge what we expect it to be. And so this gives us a lot of insight as to what's going on with the individual based on what their chief complaint is. What is it that they're coming in to work with? One of the classic things that comes into this office is children dealing with attention issues. So there's very descriptive patterns that show up in the brain when a child is experiencing attention issues. So that's one part of it, is that we can look at the brain waves to help figure out, why am I having such trouble paying attention when attention is innate for every human being? When we do the neurofeedback, that's where neurofeedback is talking to the subconscious mind, and it's doing it through feedback mechanisms. So you're going to sit in a chair, you'll be comfortable, you might have a cap or a couple of leads on, and every time, based on what we figured out in the report, how we're going to create the program, now you're going to sit comfortably and watch something. That's your conscious mind, and that's just really to entertain you. A filter goes over the screen.
Yeah.
And then every time you're in the right place, then it's going to get bright and there's going to be a little sound. So we're using two powerful senses, visual and auditory, in order to get into the subconscious mind. And we don't want to use the conscious mind when we're training, because the conscious mind is the reflection of what the report told us. So this is one of the ways one of our therapies gets involved with that subconscious mind. So that's one part. And then I think the other thing that is so interesting to me, how children so young are already so influenced with really negative thinking patterns. How many times especially when I'm doing their assessment and I'm getting to know them and they go, oh, did I get it wrong? And they're already going into this direction that they're not good enough. They didn't do something right. And we really focus on that. We're a coach. We're here to help you make your dreams come true, whatever that dream is. Maybe it's...
Is it okay if I ask you a question here? Because
yeah, go ahead.
I'm very familiar with what you're describing, neurofeedback, and I'm so glad that you were able to describe neurofeedback so articulately in what it does and how it captures. And we do neurofeedback at our center as well.
Great.
And it is for our audience. This is our patients who listen to this, and it's very important for them to understand kind of how the conscious mind and unconscious mind is working together when you do neurofeedback. But when you first started, you started with that the development of that subconscious mind starts from the third trimester all the way to 8.5. How is that decided? Where did that figure come from? I'm very curious.
Well, it's in published articles, and I got to agree with you. Like, who figured that out? Who figured out that the last
QEEG on those?
trimester of pregnancy is when the subconscious mind is coming on board? But I think it has a lot to do. And this is probably one of those curious points that Soraya was saying. We're going to talk about also some things that you're curious about. So I'm curious about that as well. But what I think could be a connection is the stuff that has to do with early on. You just got so much cellular division going on. You've got so much differentiation going on, and you even got apoptosis going on. So apoptosis, for your audience, is cell death, but I also want to make it connected to pruning.
Yeah.
And so we've learned, especially in the autistic population, they are not going through those processes.
Yeah.
And so there's so much differences that we see in that particular population that as I go deeper into looking at that aspect of brain development, what happens at the end, where it's all the fine tuning that's going on. Also, so that's one part that I'm curious about. My other part, though, is I could see another thought that it's really going on the whole time because the baby is so intimately connected to the rhythm of the mother and especially primitive reflexes. I love primitive reflexes. And recently, about like maybe even just a couple of years ago, I actually learned that the asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, while it's well known that it helps through the birth process, but every kick is actually going into the homunculus, the sensory motor cortex. So when you learn that these pieces are happening all along, I would go on the side that there's got to be some shaping of every part of brain function from really, are you familiar with Dr. Bruce Lipton?
Yes. The
That man.
biology of belief.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
love that man. I've actually had the opportunity to meet him at a conference, and I volunteered to be his airport taxi driver, and that way I could just pick his brain. But
Literally.
literally, yeah. He talks a lot about that there's a surge of information really collected 2 weeks before the baby's even conceived. What's going on with mom and dad in order to, come together and create this life. So I don't think we really could put
Yeah.
a very definitive stamp on something when it began. But I do know that the window between 7.5 and 8.5 is a critical time in that hierarchy of the brain coming online.
Yeah. So are you able to describe to us the forming of this subconscious mind in the early childhood phases?
Well, the best part of it that I would put is it's the limbic area, it's the cingulate gyrus,
Yeah.
the very deepest structures of the brain. And when we talk about brain development, babies are fully formed, but they're not fully functioning when they get here. Obviously, we know that, right? And so I've even started to get very deep into interoception and the earliest forms of reflexes, which is known as the withdrawal reflexes. So in my mind's eye, what I'm looking at is this surge of the most innermost parts of the brain going right down to the limbic area, the cingulate gyrus, the hypothalamus, and its orchestration with the brainstem, because the brainstem is the very first structure that all babies are relying on. And so, because that's your vitals, that's
Right.
your survival, that's your reticular activating system. So think of it as the gyri up here at the top. It's all being influenced by the very core structures. And that cingulate gyrus is a midline structure. So that means it's going to influence both sides of the brain. It has a front, it has a middle, and it has a back. The back part is can be related to things like PTSD or somebody trying to suppress something that happened to them, where the anterior is really connected to this outward emotional state that you're having. So that I don't have something specific to say, well, this is what the research says, but I would put it in the development of those innermost pieces and how it relates to that person's most eternal self. And I connect that dot too, because what I see in kids. So a lot of these kids, we have 1 in 5 kids that are not developing as expected. And a lot of those pieces are the ones that they have trouble with, like toileting, emotional regulation. And the other parts that you see, like the right side of the brain is your emotional quotient. The left side of your brain is your intellectual quotient. And so a lot of times you see this suppression of the right side of the brain. And that's why these children are very much emotionally dysregulated. There's not enough activity going there. And you're supposed to be in the right side first. And then all of that, that's why they call it the intellectual or the oldest part of the brain, because everything transfers over there. But you get a lot of kids that do it prematurely. And so everybody says how intelligent they are, but they couldn't hold their emotions together for anything. So I'm not a proponent for gifted children, because really there doesn't need to be a gifted child. We need to have a well-balanced child, a child that's actually going through their development as expected. Now, I say all this because, too, we see adults. And so one of the questions that I'll ask them is, how long you been going through this? And 100% of the time, ever since I was a kid.
Yeah, that's very true. Me and Simi are both in pediatric hospitalists.
I
And
know, she told me that. That's
and it's
awesome.
fascinating the way you're describing the anterior cingulate gyrus, the hippocampus, the limbic system, the really central deep structures. And we know in pediatrics, because, just the way the brain on MRI differentiates, the first thing that the baby does is first learns to see, learns to visual, has a regarding reflex, and is very, so it starts from the back of the brain. And then
Exactly.
then that parietal network, that sensory network, learns to kind of come online as they learn to look around and process information, sensory information. They learn to know what's safe, what's not safe. And then they learn to sit up, and the motor cortex comes online, and then they start walking. And then comes that frontal brain, which is, the executive brain. And as that matures and differentiates into their adolescent years and even further till their young adulthood, that differentiation, both by networks, when you can see this on MRI, you can see the differentiation, the gray and white matter differentiation. And what you're describing also is that lateralization, right, which is the harmonic balancing that you see. And there's studies, I think, even to show, that there's a difference between the hormonal effects on the brain, which affects the lateralization of that architecture in the brain. What are your comments? Everyone, this is how I kind of understand it from the developmental effect. Growth really happens from the back to the front and then starts to differentiate. That's just the basic structure. But when the trauma occurs, does that affect that developmental growth, that differentiation?
Oh, yes. And it does start in the back, but it also starts back right. And then it's trying to do those connections in the network. Before we go into that, I really want to bring a visual piece. And initially in the womb, we are all defensive. So we are going to learn first how to survive. And this also relates back to the brain development, neurofeedback, where you are going after a reward and an inhibition. And in order to get that inhibition, there's got to have been some training there somewhere. And that's in those withdrawal reflexes. And you think about what's in the womb. Okay, it's baby, amniotic fluid, vibration. Okay, so it's a very light touch world. Okay, so I always like to show somebody what that really means. I'll get right up into their face. And you know how people will go like this. You're not really touching them, but there's an energy, there's a presence, right? And then there's a transition. And that word in reflex world is very important because we make so many transitions in our life. So we go from pulling everything away to going towards at 8 to 9 weeks with the Moro reflex. But the withdrawal reflex, all of these reflexes, you will learn something in your neurology, and then they're meant to grow up. So we still use the withdrawal reflexes today. If you stepped on something, that's the common one, you're going to recoil off. If you burn your arm, you don't even think about it, right? Well, in kid world, one of the things that I notice a lot is high distractibility. And lots of kids come in and mom or teachers or whatever, my kid is so easily distracted. So here's the vision piece. You're absolutely right. You got to see your visual cortex is in the back and you're developing this. So central vision, like if you go to the eye doctor and they say, read the smallest line of print that you can see. Central vision is only 6% of your vision. Peripheral vision is 94 of your vision, and it includes your eyes, your ears, and your vestibular system. So if somebody's coming up behind me, I'd look because I'd hear them and I'd see if I'm safe. So when these reflexes stay firing, these kids are just scanning. They're scanning their world because they're trying to make sure they're safe. And that is a huge part that I have found is relating to why this kid can't pay attention, because he's scanning his world. And so I do a little manual test with him. Okay, look at my nose. Tell me everything you can see in the room without looking at it. And in a second, blinds. Okay, but you looked. Can you just use this part? And then we also have a piece of diagnostic equipment that we can actually measure, record what their eyes are doing. And I got to tell you, 95% of the time, that's what's really going on, is at that developmental piece. Now, if we took that back to the window when the visual cortex was coming on, we have to know that that is also programming their subconscious mind. Anything that goes on, it's not a perfect path. It should be, but if you take the experience that an individual is going through, that's what influences how that's actually going to shape up, how it's going to shape up the pattern from the back to the front, the differentiation, the circuits communicating. And that takes us back to the autistic population. Those circuits are not shaping up. They're not pruning. They're not becoming efficient. And you've got just a lot of chaos that's going on up in the brain. So what would that do to the subconscious mind, right? So it's the individual's experience that really shapes what this is going to look like.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for describing that in such a beautiful way, because as you're talking, we're talking about imprints that already kind of come, primed in this young developing brain. And on top of that, we're getting this layering of all the different positive and negative, kind of signals that are happening and molding. And, some of the things that are happening are the caregiver's emotional states, the milieu and attachment patterns that are, available during early childhood. Then those repeated experiences and narratives of childhood. You are this. No, you are that. This is how this person is. Like, how many stories get told about a child based on superficial behavior or just how they look, and and that relationship, the emotional relationship the parent might have. And as I'm recounting all of this is so much a part of a lot of the adults that we see who are dealing with childhood trauma. Is these are those unspoken ways in which childhood trauma then imprints for their adult behavioral patterns and relational patterns that they may then start to only recognize in their 30s or 40s when they've lived life a little bit, going, why do I do this every time something like this occurs? Why am I so avoidant in my attachment, or why am I so, anxious in my attachment? And it's all wrapped up in some of these patterns that you're talking about. And so what my question then, I guess everybody's question would be, is can these be changed? Can these imprints be changed later in life?
I think you can change anything. I think that you've got to be willing to do the work. And I think that's why I went into pediatrics, because they're in an open window. It's still tough because you got to get mom and dad on board, right? And one of the things that I think is really impacting, at least I'm sure you see it too in California, but I just think there is no margin today. I always describe this as, remember writing on loose leaf paper, and on the left, there's two skinny lines. Don't go to the left of the red lines. That's the margin. I think everybody's at the edge of the paper. And so when you bring that concept to the person, are you willing to do the work? It takes a lot of work, especially as you get older. And I know you can, because we all talk about neuroplasticity, right? And we can put in a great effort and a great threshold of input, and you can start to move the needle. There's one of the things I have for my adults is a connect journal. That's what I call it. And it's literally to teach them how to work on the brain, but you in conjunction with doing something. Okay. So like if you're here doing neurofeedback, I do a lot of exercise for the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, more midline, but hippocampus is in the temporal areas. And there's great research. And if we have time, we'll dip into that little piece because it's really beautiful when you talk about cognitive flexibility and personality. But you got it, to go back to the Connect journal, you have to put in the frequency and the intensity to change the brain. Okay. And the brain loves novelty, loves it. It doesn't want to be in old ruddy patterns. Okay. Give me something new. Okay. So we start off with, okay, what is it that you want to work on? Okay. And then we're going to ask you the 5W questions, and you're going to build on that over a 30-day period. But if you will stick to this every day, 15, 20 minutes, it isn't like, you're taking a class. It's for you to get centered. I tell people pick the same spot every day and do your work so that you can have association. Your brain will get into that state faster and faster and faster. Within 1 week, you will have a bud in your brain. Now, a lot of adults, they feel it and they go, okay, I got it. I can do it from here. And that's the mistake, because if you don't keep putting the intentional attention with that intensity and frequency, it's going to shrivel up. You've got to give it the opportunity to grow and to connect. Now, here's and I watched this during early spring. There's a tree right outside my window, and in early spring, it was just branches. And to me, it looked like a circuit. So the cool part about the brain is the microglia cells. So when you start down a new path, all of a sudden your brain goes, we're not paying attention to that old thought pattern. Okay. Oh, we're growing something new. Excellent. Okay. Keep going. Keep going. The microglia cells go in for your behalf and say, I need some stuff. I'm going to go be like Pac-Man. I'm going to go eat up that old stinking thinking pattern, and I'm going to take all that good stuff and I'm going to put it to the new pattern that you are developing. Wow. I mean, that is your brain working on your behalf. So I think you can. I think it takes some chutzpah, but I think you can. You just got to work.
Yeah. You had mentioned the negative self-talk that the children have as well earlier and earlier in that critical phase. What would you say, why does that start? Why is it starting earlier and earlier? Is this a societal kind of conditioning? Is this something else in our growth? I don't know. What do you think is causing this negative self-referential thinking? And what are things that parents can do to prevent that from starting so early, in my opinion?
So I think there's been many things that have happened over time. If I were to kind of put a few things in a nutshell, I would say one of the things that I noticed, because I've been in practice now 30 years, and one of the things is that we keep kids too busy. We don't let them be bored. Everybody's got to win a trophy. We have no expectation, and we just kind of keep them all going constantly. And you need time. You need time to take a break. You don't need to be scheduled for something 5 days a week. And it is really okay that you get bored, because that's going to help you find your creative side to go do something. So the first 3 brain waves, delta, theta, alpha. Delta is your sleep wave, 1 to 3 hertz. Theta, 4 to 7, is your imagination, your subconscious mind, your precursor to sleep. Alpha is your processor. And the frequency of those first 3 matches the age of children. So babies are 1 to 3. That's why they sleep. Okay. 4 to 7-year-olds are all theta. That's why they take a broom and turn it into a pony. Okay. And then 8 to 12 hertz for alpha, you're school age. You're starting to put things together. Right? So enhancing those elements of childhood and teaching our children to do things with their hands, with their minds. I have seen, especially over the last 5 or 6 years, some of the chief problems that the parents would share with me is, Well, we lock up the devices, but they're breaking in and they're getting it. Now, I gotta tell you, that's an issue. If they're doing that as a child, do you think it's magically gonna stop? So when we have kids that aren't following the structure that the parent has decided to run their household, I see so many kids being the controller of the household, the mood setter. You know, I've had parents literally say to me, "We walk on eggshells because if we don't, he gets mad at us." And we've got kids that are putting holes in the wall, yelling and screaming at their parents. We have to be the parent. These children were given to each and every one of us. It's up to us. Our brains are developed. They're not. And they really do crave structure. But if you don't provide structure, you're going to actually see what's going on up here. And it's not that they've got a behavior problem. It's the guardrails aren't there. Children have to have a bedtime. Children have to have manners. Say, "I'm sorry." Say, "Excuse me." I had a little girl in here the other day, and she's adorable, but she does not think anything when her mother and I are having a conversation. And I literally said to her, "Now say, 'Excuse me.'" And she cried. And mom looked at me and says, "Yeah, she has a really hard time saying that." And I'm like, she's 3.
Oh my gosh.
Who who's having the hard time? And this is what I mean by that whole imprinting part. I just don't think anybody has any margins. I think we've lost our ability to know what our role is as a parent. This is the most valuable thing you're ever going to do in your whole life. I love being in practice, but there is nothing greater in my life than being a mother to my daughter and my son. That is the greatest accomplishment. And I have not always been perfect. Trust me. I've learned a lot. She's going to be 27 in about a week and a half, and he's 38. And I've learned so much from them. But it's the greatest role I've ever had. And I would really encourage parents, be parents. There's so much going on. These kids have got to get off of cell phones. Kids have to get off of devices. Here's some brain stuff to back that up. So they did some imaging called dense tensor imaging, DTI. And they found that the children were actually developing more white matter in their brain than gray matter. Now, you're both shaking your head, so you've read this too. Okay. So what does that mean to your audience is that you have 2 types of matter. You have gray, you have white. Gray is where we process. White is how we get it everywhere in our brain. We were talking about the circuits. So if you have too much of that, it's like having too many trains on the track. And I bet there's do you guys have a subway in California?
Yeah.
Yeah. So pull up a picture of the subway station and how many trains are coming into it. I always pull up Chicago, but that they can't filter. So that's literally changing the architect of their brain and will shape their subconscious mind as well. Now, this scrolling, okay, that was purposely engineered to make you addicted to it because it is influencing dopamine in the brain, a neurotransmitter. And I see this all the time. I had a 15-year-old male acted like he was coming into the office, and I have 2 windows so I can see everybody coming in. And I was sitting here and I was going, wonder why I didn't hear the door open. Well, the parent dropped him off, and when I opened the door and looked for him, he was sitting on a bench next door on his phone doing some kind of gambling at 15. Okay. So these things are really happening. Now, the new stuff is this, and this is adults too. Everybody's like this. They're calling this the posture of dementia because in dementia, you're looking down all the time. So you're changing what neurological input is coming into your eyeballs. You have overfixation of gaze, and you are literally changing that feedback mechanism into yourself. So there's a lot to this that I don't just say it just to don't have any fun, but we've just gone way too overboard. And I think the pendulum has gone out the door, and I think we've really got to bring it back. We've got
Tell
it.
me,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, tell me, and I love how you bring it all in because what we're talking about is happening here and now. And when the device owner and the youngest device owner in a family is in charge of the energy, then basically it's the company that's running the devices and is doing that, right? So we've kind of
Yeah.
outsourced parenting in some way. What are you seeing as changes to the subconscious that are occurring? You mentioned a few things, but I think I really want to flesh that out. Like, what are some subconscious patterns that you're noticing? For example, I had somebody ask me, like, hey, it's gotten so bad with my 3-year-old that he won't lay down to sleep if the device is not in the room. And so we even got to a conversation about, like, how do you slowly, gradually remove the device, from the room, knowing that there's going to be that upset, that agitation, this a sense of missing something really meaningful. And so subconsciously, what we're talking about is children and adolescents who are more attached to their devices in this brain way than they are to the people around them or to what's happening. And so what are you noticing as changes in the subconsciousness of both the children and the adults?
Well, what you said about agitation and irritability, that's number one. They're just incredibly quick fused and they cannot regulate. And then that's where it becomes the parent going, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. And so if we're talking about a 3-year-old, if you've gotten yourself to where you're almost like a prisoner to your child's behavior, you're reinforcing it. And I err on the side. We got to do some cold turkey and we have to deal with that emotional stuff for a shorter period of time because it is having such a long lasting imprint on that child's brain. And where in life, the other thing I always bring up, where in life does somebody do that with you? Like at your job? Does somebody go, okay, I'm going to gradually start to ask you to not be on your phone and get your work done? No, you probably would either get written up or fired. And so you don't just automatically graduate into an adult status. Everything that we're doing with our children today in that subconscious mind is going through. So one of the things that I think could be very beneficial, and I hope it doesn't come across, it's like just really cold, but it isn't meant that way. But again, I'm going to encourage you to be a parent. That child needs structure. And so you can't have a conversation with a 3-year-old. And that's the other thing. I think sometimes parents are trying to reason with their children, and reason isn't available right now, especially when you're that little. They have to learn reason. Here's one example. I have a young man, very emotional, very attached to devices, and we're working on regulating. Now, at 8 and above, I can explain some things. Now, I do everything in play, so it makes it fun, okay? And I connect with the child of their interest. So sports is a big one, right? So we have interactive metronome. And so that's that, clapping thing. You guys familiar with interactive metronome? Okay. So we work on to this progression until the kids are on a hockey slide, sliding back and forth while they're playing. And they have to work up to 1,000 repetition, which is about 18 minutes. Okay. So this particular young man, went through his progressions and his scores now consistently 50 or below. So a good score is under 100, okay, for the audience purposes. So I can take his physical performance and I can connect the dot. Like, you have incredible timing. That means that emotional side of your brain and the intellectual side of your brain, they can talk to each other. And you can reason. You can take a step back when some trigger comes about and you can say, wait a minute, I'm going to take a minute. So with a school age kid, you can have that kind of a conversation. You can't have that kind of conversation with a 3-year-old. There has to be, look, instead of the devices, what does the child like to do? Mom would know, right? So maybe you have a basket full of creative things, big fat crayons, maybe some goo. They like to play with that slime stuff. Maybe there's bubbles. Maybe there's a coloring book, things that the child likes that you would put with them. And this is how we're going to replace it. Now, the child could go shopping with her. That way, the child would get excited about what they're doing. Now, these are common things that we should be able to do with a child that is going in a typical development. If not, if it doesn't work that easy, that is a child going into a reflexive behavior. And regardless of what's going on for a child, whether it's autism, attention, dyslexia, oppositional defiance, it doesn't matter. Every child will regress. They don't have a point of reference to pull from. They only have what they've come from, and that is the brainstem, and that is the reflexes. And if that's what
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And even as you're talking, when we say that kids are growing up with this kind of heightened sense of looking, kind of needing to look around and always be aware, right? There's this heightened sense of just being part of this kind of like, yeah, dopamine kind of, constant stream. And then as they get older and now we're in our teens and our 20s, we're seeing things like, difficulty kind of becoming independent, or difficulty in, or leaving, getting, for example, a driver's license a little bit later, and not really being ready for it. Are you seeing those kind of changes as well?
yes, and especially if I get to see their brain map, I've actually told parents, if this were my child, they would not be getting their learner's permit until their brain is regulated, because at that stage of development, they are getting an explosion to that frontal lobe, but it's almost like, woohoo, I can do anything. And girls are very, very common to have car accidents when they first get behind the wheel. Boys are more common to get speeding tickets, but they're not ready for all of this. And some states have actually gone to driver's license age, which I gotta be honest with you. If you're gonna put a person behind the wheel of the car, they really do need to be ready for it. And I know we live in a culture that we just kind of expect we should be able to do all these things, but we also are in a cultural shift, and we have been for at least a decade. And they're definitely not the way it was when I grew up. And, I just did one of my podcasts the other day talking about how like nobody even makes eye contact with each other anymore.
Yeah.
And we're in a different space.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think your work is really very, very fascinating, especially because you're doing these QEEGs over the course of their time and, of course, their treatment, from where there's a lot of, I do feel like the adolescent and the young adult and as well as child brain is very, very pliable. And
Yes.
even when we do treatments with ketamine treatments, we find that their doses is often they're lighter, and they tend to have different types of experiences. And we're able to get to that developmental that access to much easier than, say, when that imprinting has become such an ingrained process over a course of decades. So I'm just fascinated. I think you probably have a lot of data that can really help a lot of people to really highlight what are the things that are actually happening, logistically and electrophysiologically. I'm sure can you speak to a little bit of what you've noticed over with just the data of comparison, a QEG from, say, a child or a 6-year-old to who you've been seeing over the course of their treatment? What do you notice in the patterning that's changing on there with neurofeedback and pre and post treatments?
Well, the families that do exactly what I tell them to do, I have a 3-tier approach: mechanical, chemical, brain. So we're going to do the movements, we're going to do the eye work, we're going to do all that physical stuff, because that's truly what wires up the brain. So think about a baby When a baby comes into this world, they're not doing reading, writing, and arithmetic. They're rolling, they're crawling, they're exploring their bodies in a gravity neutral kind of a position. So we're very mechanical. I'll speak to the hippocampus for a second. So that's one of the reasons why everybody does aerobic activity, even 3-year-olds. And we get them to where they can walk forward on the trampoline or treadmill and backwards on the treadmill, because they really get their brain's attention when they do something the brain isn't expecting. But when you do aerobic activity for 20 minutes and your target heart rate, you literally burn the stress chemicals off of the hippocampus, which has a very high affinity for the stress chemicals. And you create the brain protein, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which now gives me a person who is, hey, what are we going to do today? They're ready for something new. And then we do a lot of lab work. We do classic stuff like food sensitivities and, gut panels and stuff like that. But recently I got into genomics, not genetics, genomics. And this has been a real game changer in looking at that ancestral influence and epigenetic influence on this individual. And then of course, the brain neuro and biofeedback. The families that do the program in its wholeness, night and day difference. And these are programs, most of them are for 40 sessions. And then you're welcome to stay on and get chiropractic care. But the ones that do the work, they change. Now, ones that come in that have, a little bit more struggle, they'll do the 40 and then we're going to go month to month. But again, if you work all 3 pieces, I could be really great at therapies, but if you don't have the right fuel, we can't make it stick. And that's just a known fact. So the ones that do that work on healing the gut, making sure this individual is not deficient, making sure they have the support they need. Maybe they do have that MTHFR and need a methylfolate. Maybe they have the folate receptor antibody and they need to stay away from dairy, all forms of dairy. And if they do it, changes are inevitable. This is what we're talking about with neuroplasticity. The ones that don't, you don't get quite the same outcome.
Yeah. And so, are you seeing changes in, attentional networks? What is the kind of network that you mostly are seeing? Because I can imagine this being a non-medical approach, non-medicated approach to ADHD for a lot of kids.
Well, it's typically you're going to have slow waves in the front of the brain with classic attention issues. So you're resolving that. And then you'll have sometimes where I see the back of the brain is hot. And we just need to balance that out. But as long as we're doing the program, and we're, like you said just a second ago, we're redoing QEEGs when we start seeing engagement is consistently above 55, 65. And the kids all get a notebook and we give them points every time, they are engaged in the process. It's counting it. So that's their score. For a kid, they love that. But when we see those things consistently changing, we're going to take another map and see what we got to polish. And I see it all the time, and I can tell they'll sit down and they're able to engage into it right away. So when we start with somebody, we're allowing them to just experience what they're going through. I love the kids that will say, "Hey, Dr. Hanson, can you make the picture bright? I can't see it." And I go, "Oh, no, I can't. But you can." And kids, they go, what do you mean? And before you know it, you got a little sound. And I go, "You just did it." And they start paying attention to that. And this one little boy that just graduated a few weeks ago, his mother really kicked in to the gut balance stuff that we do. And when he would sit down, he sounded like a rapid firing machine gun. He was into it and points were just collecting. So you're seeing regulation, you're seeing awareness. And we teach them as soon as they become aware of what's going on, I'll start asking them, "Hey, how'd you do today?" "I did well." I go, "How do you know?" And they go, "Because the picture was bright most of the time." So now they're really engaged with the process.
Mm-hmm.
So now a program is only good.
Self-awareness.
Yeah. The program's only good if you can take it out that door, right? And so we teach once you get to that point, if something happens, if we're, still trying to polish certain behaviors, I hate that word behavior, but if we're trying to polish certain actions, I'll tell mom, okay, they've got this. If something happens, tell them to sit down because we do I am really into breathing too. So we teach them how to do biofeedback. They start at biofeedback before they go into the neuro room. And I go tell them to sit down, take 3 deep breaths, and get the picture bright in their mind. And these kids are accomplishing this.
That's amazing. So I want to bring it all together now, because I think part of a lot of what you described is also something that becomes available in that neuroplastic state after psychedelic treatments, which is how we interact with adults now. And you talked about consistency, and you talked about how it's with the frequency and the amount of time that you're spending each time in that activity that's reinforcing. And then you even talked about the Connect journal. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Where you're really engaging, and that play and creativity are kind of the bedrock of how you do this. So I'm really thankful to you for bringing in the 2 ideas that I think Alia and I both hold dear, is that part of what's happening in adults in the neuroplastic phase is somehow similar in a lot of ways. And we're hearing confirmation here of what you see happening in children, and, just this idea that we're just opening up the ability that the brain has. And it's not just psychedelics. Exercise does the same thing. Anything, when we choose to learn something new, we're already, growing neuroplasticity and kind of, BDNF. So not to kind of, just stick to one route. But to me, it feels like we're at the cusp of teaching our brains to function in the ways that, we weren't able to know. I think the science is all kind of hitting at once. Like we've not really had an understanding that, the prenatal time was as kind of conducive. I mean, we have we had understandings, but I think now we have more evidence. And so as the evidence kind of builds up, to really pay attention to prenatal, early childhood, attachment, all these reinforcements that we talk about. And then now we have this ability to kind of work with them in real time, so that, the brain doesn't kind of just stay fixed. I want to ask you, like, what are you curious about going forward? Like, what gets you up every day? What kind of, we'll end with that curious question.
Well, I think one of the things that I'm very curious about is why are so many kids, I feel like they're losing their childhood. And so every day that's like what my brain is looking at and dissecting every time I engage with them. And every one of them is just a new challenge for me. And how can I get this information more mainstream, more aware, rather than just sticking a label on them and have that be their badge? I don't want it to be their badge.
Yeah. As you were talking about, how things are more negatively skewed, a part that really came to me was that we've gone from a schooling system in which your testing and your homework wasn't digitized, right? And you weren't constantly able to see where you were in relationship to your peers. And the amount of testing that we're doing, the amount of constant feedback, amount of deadlines that we have, I get intimidated, and I get a sense of like, I'll never get that done. I can just imagine, like, and I know, like, kids are really struggling with their sense of self-trust. So thank you for bringing it back to, just like, what are we losing, and how can we bring people back, and recognizing that technology has its advantages, but it also has its real detriments. And we have to be the parents. We have to be the ones in the middle to say and be heard, and I think there is a huge movement happening. I know LAUSD has just banned all devices under the age of 16, which was met with an outcry. But a lot of school districts are stepping in because parents just, there has to be a social change, because you can't really take a child off of where the entire social network is, because that also is unfair. But yeah, we're really struggling. And I think as pediatricians, as physicians who work with, this intersection, we really look forward to, rebalancing that out on a brain health level. So thank you for bringing that.
Yes.
All right. Alia, would you like to ask any
No,
questions?
I think we have so much more to talk about. And I was just looking at your website and I see your work and I want to be able to speak on, I think, your podcast too. I think really, I see at our center, we're kind of doing ketamine, TMS, and neurofeedback as a triad of a chemical, a way to kind of enhance BDNF and allow for that neuroplasticity to occur and reorganization of patterning, and TMS being an external treatment that helps stimulate kind of the areas that are not functioning or in harmonizing rhythm. And then there's neurofeedback, which is, I feel, is a very internal way of training the brain with, as you're describing, with the games that are available and training your brain with the neurofeedback, I think, technique really. And there's so much we can see happening in this field. So much interest and a necessary non-medicated way, I think, would really help a lot of people.
Yeah.
Thank you for really doing your work. Yeah. And how would people find you? Tell us more about, where would they find more information about this for our audience?
Well, I have a podcast too, and they did put that little Connect My Child's Brain on that one. So
Yeah.
that's what it is on Apple and Spotify and all the other platforms. But you can also go to the website, connectmybrain.com, and we have a complimentary consultation, and feel free to use it. I am the one that will call you back and just connect. And we're putting together a lot of tools that we can help parents really understand, especially this reflex part to the developing brain.
I see there's an app as well. So
Yes. Thank you. There's an app too.
very good. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
What a
Thanks,
great
Dave.
conversation. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thanks for joining us on the Two Curious MD podcast. We hope today's episode inspired you to ask new questions and explore fresh perspectives. We challenge you to ask us those unasked questions that you're curious about in your medical practice, condition, health, and wellness.
If you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to subscribe, share it with somebody just as curious, and leave us a review. It helps us keep the curiosity alive. Post or comment with a question or curious inquiry that you have and seek to explore or learn with us. Stay curious, and we'll see you next time.